Welcome to this week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, and I'm the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 100 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know. My wife, Jean, lived with progressive MS for 23 years, so I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact a family. Currently, I serve on the MS Society's Community Review of MS Research Committee. I'm a district activist leader and trustee for the National MS Society, and I chair the Society's California Government Relations Advisory. The MS Society's Ask an MS Expert webcast is designed to give us a place for the MS community to connect and to connect you with experts who are ready to answer your questions on the topics that impact people affected by MS every day. Please feel free to post your comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. MS navigators are online throughout today's program, answering those questions and connecting you to resources. When you're living with MS, choosing to maintain a healthy lifestyle can make a real difference. Joining me to talk about the importance of maintaining a healthy lifestyle and to share some valuable strategies on tips for living your best life is Dr. Lisa Doggett. Dr. Doggett is a family and lifestyle medicine physician at the MS and Neuroimmunology Center at Dell Medical School at the University of Texas at Austin. And she's the senior medical director for Sagility. Dr. Doggett has been living with MS since 2009, and she's the author of the memoir, Up the Down Escalator, Medicine, Motherhood, and Multiple Sclerosis, which follows her transformation from doctor to patient living with MS. Welcome, Dr. Doggett. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Lifestyle medicine may not be a term that all our viewers are familiar with, so I hope you'll start us off by explaining what lifestyle medicine is and why it's important to maintain a healthy lifestyle.
Sure. Thank you so much. Lifestyle medicine hasn't been around a very long time. The American College of Lifestyle Medicine was formed in 2004, so it's a fairly new specialty, but a lot of the components of it go back for centuries, really, and rely on a lot of longstanding research. So lifestyle medicine is based on 6 pillars that include, of course, nutrition, but really specifically a whole food plant-based diet, which I'll talk more about, as well as exercise, maintaining physical activity. Sleep, of course, very important, is one of the other pillars, as well as avoidance of unhealthy substances, stress management, and my favorite, which is connection with others. We know that these lifestyle medicine tenets are especially important for people living with MS because people with MS are at higher risk for other chronic diseases like heart disease, other autoimmune conditions, stroke, obesity, diabetes. So we want to make sure we prevent these other chronic conditions, and lifestyle medicine can help us to do that.
So how can someone go about incorporating healthy habits into their life?
Well, I think it takes a real commitment to self-care. And I really have talked to my patients. I now work with people who have MS, and I talk to them about how MS really can be it's a huge life-changing experience to get a diagnosis with MS, but it can also be a launch pad for a even healthier lifestyle. So let your MS guide you to a healthier lifestyle. And I think really that means committing yourself to self-care. Make sure that you're following those 6 tenets as best you can, learning the best ways to stay healthy. And it's very confusing. There is so much misinformation out there, a lot of confusing information. You want to make sure you're getting that information from reliable sources like the National MS Society, which has an amazing website and all kinds of great programs and webinars and other great sources of information. You want to assess your current situation. So if you are dealing with, a challenging diagnosis like MS, you're wanting to change your lifestyle because you're concerned about progression or about other comorbidities, you have to see where you're at now with all of those different tenets of lifestyle medicine. And then what are you willing to change? It may be that you can tweak some things here and there, or maybe you want to make a massive lifestyle change. But just determine where you are in your sort of thinking around that, what you want to change. And then you want to set goals. So you want to be specific, but realistic, and what is really attainable. What are you really going to do? And also what's impactful for you? What's going to really make a difference in terms of your overall quality of life?
I always find it's easier to make a change when I understand how I'm going to benefit. So tell me, how can adopting a healthy lifestyle be beneficial for people who are living with MS?
Well, a healthy lifestyle not only helps prevent and reverse even other chronic conditions that we often can see alongside MS, it also can help us live with MS because it can reduce symptoms. So, people who struggle with fatigue can benefit from improving their sleep quality, improving their activity during the day, and even their diet. People who struggle with mobility can really improve their functioning through being able to do more, being more active. All of the tenets really go together to improve mood as well, which we know is an issue a lot of times in people with MS. So reducing symptoms is a big one. Also, slowing progression. So this is a tricky one because there's not as much research as we'd like, but we do know with pretty good, solid evidence that exercise, regular exercise, reduces disease progression in MS. We also know that it's important to continue using your disease modifying therapy. And I do want to emphasize that because I am not recommending anyone stop their DMT, even if they're adopting all of the tenets and recommendations from lifestyle medicine. This is really supposed to go alongside the medications that your neurologist has recommended. And then again, preventing other chronic diseases, so important. My kind of motto is one chronic disease is more than enough. We don't want people to develop other comorbidities.
I like your motto. Actually, we heard from Sabrina, who has two questions for us. Sabrina says she's confused about the relationship between diet and MS. She wants to know if there is a specific diet that's beneficial for people living with MS. And she wants to know what are the most effective strategies for adopting and maintaining a healthy, nutritious diet if you're living with MS.
Well, I can understand why Sabrina is confused. There's a lot of research still going on to help us determine what the best diets are for MS, but there is not one MS diet, despite what you may see in bookstores and online. What we do know, though, is that a whole food, plant-based diet has been shown through decades of research to reduce other chronic conditions. And there is some evidence that diets very similar to that, that are focused on lots of plants, vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, legumes, whole grains, diets with those components tend to help us do better in terms of reducing other chronic conditions. Therefore, we know that we're more likely to improve our functioning and quality of life if we don't have those other comorbidities. So, a whole food plant-based diet, I think a lot of people are resistant to going kind of the full scope of whole food plant-based diet, eliminating all animal products. And yet there's a lot of things you can do right now, even if without making a drastic change in your diet to improve your overall health. So some specific things: increasing fruits and vegetables. I recommend at least 5 servings a day if you can get there. If you're only at one now, go to 2, go to 3, but try to get up to at least 5. Reduce or avoid red meat. Red meat in most of the diets that have been looked at in terms of prevention of other chronic conditions and with MS, avoiding red meat is or at least reducing it is important. You also want to avoid sugar sweetened beverages, which is a real common cause for obesity and doesn't give us a lot of good nutritional benefit. Reduce or avoid ultra processed foods. Those tend to be in packages. Lots of snacks are ultra processed, whereas we want the kind of the whole food. So a solid apple, not apple juice or apple sauce. We would rather that you eat the fruit in its original form to be at healthiest.
Exercise is beneficial for everyone's overall health. However, some people living with MS can find exercise challenging because of their particular set of MS symptoms. What strategies or adaptations would you suggest for effectively incorporating exercise into a daily routine?
Yes, exercise is so important, and it can be really difficult if you're struggling with symptoms like fatigue or, again, physical limitations. So, I do think that it's important to be creative, to work with a physical therapist or an occupational therapist if you're struggling and need to come up with some modified activities that can be useful to keep you moving. But I do think that almost anyone can exercise if they make it a priority and if they focus on their abilities rather than their disabilities. Especially if you're struggling with something like fatigue and you haven't exercised in a while, it's important to start off slow, gradually build up. So maybe it's just taking a walk twice a day for 5 minutes, and then you're working your way up to 10, and then even more. Exercise can also take different forms for different people. So you want to be open-minded to new forms of exercise. Like maybe you want to try water-based aerobics or yoga. Stationary bike can actually be a really good source of exercise for people that may have other mobility challenges. And you, of course, don't want to forget strength training, which is recommended to be done twice a week of all major muscle groups, some kind of resistance exercises, in addition to aerobic exercise. So aerobic exercise recommendations include that we do 150 minutes a week. So it's about 30 minutes, 5 days a week of moderate intensity exercise. That's like a brisk walk, a moderately paced bike ride, swimming, dancing. A lot of those would count. And then finally, I think an important tip is to pair your exercise with something fun. So go for a walk with a friend. Save a fun TV show that you only watch when you're doing your stationary bike or your resistance training exercises. Find someone to go with you to the gym to do strength training exercises together, for example, or have a podcast or an audiobook that you like and you listen to only when you exercise.
Christian tells us that he's feeling overwhelmed and stressed about his MS. And he wants to know if there are any coping strategies or techniques that are best suited to managing that MS related stress.
Gosh, stress management, I think, is the hardest one of the lifestyle medicine components or tenants for me, and I really get that. MS is a tough condition to deal with, especially if you end up with a lot of symptoms and have other. I mean, just have life itself is stressful, so it's always going to be tough. But especially if you're adding something in like MS with all the uncertainty and other symptoms. So, I think all of the tenets of lifestyle medicine can help with stress, especially managing your sleep and making sure you're getting exercise. So, you want to be sure you're doing all of those other things to help support yourself, and that will reduce your stress. Connecting with others too, very important. And, I think getting involved with a support group or reaching out to other people that are dealing with MS can be very helpful and kind of giving you strategies and resources. I've found that journaling is very helpful for stress management. It kind of helps me process what's going on, get it out of my head, and then I can move on. And I tend to write in a journal every night. Meditation, especially mindfulness-based stress reduction meditation, is another tool that I've used to help with stress. There are classes, it's called MBSR, or mindfulness-based stress reduction classes, that you can take. There's some online, they're all over the country, and I found that to be incredibly helpful with stress as well as with my symptoms. And then I think you have to be comfortable saying no, and that's a tough thing for a lot of us. But my sister taught me the motto, say no to say yes, so that when you say no to something like, I can't go to this particular meeting or watch this webinar that I know might be fun, but I really need to be able to be with my kids tonight. I'm saying yes to being with my kids, even while I'm saying no to that other opportunity. And then finally, I guess, making sure that if you are having a lot of stress, that you feel comfortable reaching out to a counselor to get some extra support. That can be really useful.
Can you talk about why it's important to avoid substances like tobacco and addictive drugs and to limit other substances like alcohol?
Sure. Yes. So, I think most of us know that smoking isn't helpful, but actually is quite harmful. But especially in MS, we know that there's a correlation between smoking and MS progression. So, if you smoke, I would say the most important thing you can do for your health is to stop. Get some help, talk to your doctor, call a quit line, but definitely get some help stopping smoking and using tobacco, even if it's in another form like vaping or chewing tobacco, also very harmful. Um, I think other addictive drugs are also, of course, harmful, but especially in MS, you're worried about exacerbating your symptoms as well as potential drug-drug interactions. And then alcohol, alcohol with MS, a moderate amount of alcohol. So a moderate amount is less than or equal to 1 drink a day for women, or no more than 2 drinks a day for men. So it's not a lot. That may be okay in most people with MS, but you have to be careful because it can make your symptoms worse, especially if you have mobility challenges, or for me, I have dizziness, which definitely gets worse with just a few sips of alcohol. And so you want to be careful of your symptoms. I think the other thing to know is that we are learning more about the impact of alcohol, and really even small amounts have been linked with increased risk of cancer and other health problems. So you want to be careful as well, for those reasons, and then also because your sleep can be disrupted even with small amounts of alcohol. And we with MS really need to protect our sleep.
Sasha tells us that she's always had trouble sleeping, but it's been especially difficult to feel well rested since she was diagnosed with MS. What can Sasha do to improve her quality of sleep?
Oh, Sasha, I feel for you. I have been there. So, yeah, speaking of sleep, I've struggled a lot with sleep issues and took sleeping medicine for a long time. I also relied on caffeine to get through my day. I know how incredibly frustrating that can be. But I have learned through my own trial and error, as well as working with patients and learning a lot about sleep, some strategies. So, a few things. One is a consistent sleep routine is really important. And that means waking up every morning and going to bed every night at about the same time. Even on weekends, you try to keep it consistent 7 days a week as best you can. You want to aim for at least 7 hours of sleep a night, usually 7 to 8 hours, but more sometimes if you've got MS and you have a lot of fatigue. Um, Making sure that you're being careful about substance use. So we've talked a little bit about alcohol. Alcohol, certainly even small amounts right before bed, can interrupt the quality, it can reduce the quality of your sleep. You have a harder time falling into a state of deep sleep with alcohol. And caffeine is a major problem for sleep. So it really depends on the person, but a lot of us, like me, are really sensitive to caffeine, and it can stay in your body for up to 8 hours. And so if you're drinking a glass of iced tea in the afternoon, which a lot of us in Texas, where I am, tend to do, it can impact your sleep later if you're going to bed 8 hours, within 8 hours. So you want to be really careful about caffeine use if that's a trigger for you. You also want to make sure your sleep environment is conducive to sleep. So that means having a dark, quiet bed to sleep in, and you're not doing other activities in your bed like watching TV or eating. Use your bed for sleep. Meditation, again, I mentioned that is very, very helpful for some people. There are some great meditation apps. I love Insight Timer. There's one called Calm, Headspace. There are lots of them out there. And then, of course, if you're really struggling with sleep, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is a very well-known, well-established, evidence-based treatment without having to rely on medications that can help you improve your sleep.
Speaking of not relying on medications, this isn't something you can pick up at the pharmacy, but social connection is an important component of overall wellness. Can you explain the benefits of social connection?
Yes, social connection is really, really important for from a health standpoint, which I think is important to keep in mind, because a lot of us doctors don't talk to our patients about connection, and yet we are now learning that social connection reduces the risk of early death, of depression, other mood disorders, even some forms of cancer or cancer deaths have been linked with, the amount of people of connection that people have. So maintaining that social connection is critically important. And yet it can be tricky if you've got MS. So you want to make sure that you prioritize relationships. Don't become too reclusive. Do reach out to others in the MS community if you're seeking connection, and find ways to build your support circle.
We heard from Tatiana, who tells us she's feeling increasingly isolated and less motivated to socialize since she was diagnosed with MS.
Yeah.
What strategies can help Tatiana build those connections, engage with others despite this decreased drive to socialize?
Right. Yes. I was just talking about, yeah, don't be too reclusive. And it can be really hard. I think a lot of us also got to be kind of more introverted and more reclusive during COVID. And certainly that didn't help. So I don't think we fully recovered. I think it's important though, from a well-being standpoint, and just keeping in mind that there are health benefits to being a little bit more social. That doesn't mean you have to go out to a party or in big groups, but it does mean reaching out to important people in your life. So if you're feeling like you've kind of have reduced your connection with others, I think it's important to reach out to an old friend or family member to reconnect. I think a lot of people will welcome that, and just say, "Hey, I've missed you. Let's connect. Let's get on the phone. Let's get on a Zoom call. Let's get together in person," which is best of all, if possible. Taking a class like at a community college or a school or an art classes. We have a lot of those and great ones in Austin where I live. Can be a really fun way to meet people. Volunteering is a great way to meet people. So you can go to volunteer to library and animal shelter. I was thinking even the National MS Society is a great place to volunteer. And then make a goal. So I had a patient recently who really was struggling with this particular issue, and we made it a goal for her to reach out to a close friend and plan something every week. Her husband doesn't work nearby, so she is making a point to go visit him on, at least one weekend a month, because they're often isolated, even for weeks at a time. So it's unusual for me as a doctor to be talking to patients about connection, but I've learned that it's so critical that I now make it a regular part of my counseling.
Well, since we're talking about the importance of social connections, are there any support groups or resources you recommend for connecting with other people living with MS?
Absolutely. So the National MS Society has some great resources on their website. There are support groups in many areas all over the country. There are also virtual support groups available. And so, I think that's a really good place to start. If you find one that's not kind of your group, that you don't feel like you fit in with them, don't hesitate to look for another one. So they're all going to have a little bit different flavor, but I think it can be really, really useful to connect with others who are experiencing this, the life with MS.
How should someone go about initiating a conversation with their doctor about incorporating lifestyle changes into their MS management plan?
Well, I think most doctors will be really excited to have patients that come to them and are, excited about initiating lifestyle medicine changes. But a lot of us doctors aren't adequately trained, particularly in things like nutrition. And some doctors may not be comfortable with a whole food plant-based diet. So you may actually learn more and have to educate your own doctor. But I do think that most doctors are going to be receptive to that. I think you want to make sure that your doctor is your partner, because you may need referrals like to physical therapy, or if you're struggling with insomnia or depression, cognitive behavioral therapy might require a referral from your doctor. So, make sure your doctor is on board. I think it's important to tell them about some of the changes you're making. For example, if you're changing to a predominantly whole food plant-based diet, you may need B12 supplements. So it's important for your doctor to be aware of that, and to be able to counsel you about making those kinds of changes. If you have a doctor who's really resistant, it may be time to find another doctor. So I do, think that this is a good way to determine if your partnership with your doctor is a good one, if they're receptive to what you're proposing.
What does recent research tell us about the advantages of embracing an overall healthy lifestyle?
Well, there's a lot of research going on. And, I think just to point out a few kind of highlights from my recent reading, one is that, more research, or I'm sorry, a positive lifestyle can reduce the incidence of the most common causes of disease, of death and disease in this country. The number one killer in the US is coronary heart disease. And if everyone adopted positive lifestyle changes, we could reduce coronary heart disease by over 80%. We also are seeing rising rates of diabetes, which is, of course, linked to a lot of death as well as a lot of disability. And lifestyle changes can reduce type 2 diabetes by over 90%. So those are some pretty strong statistics from my standpoint. But I think even if we adopt just one positive behavior, we could reduce the risk of coronary heart disease by half. So these are really powerful tools, actually much more powerful than many of the medicines we have. And when they're used in conjunction with medicines, in many cases, they can be particularly helpful. And then I think also keeping in mind, more recent studies show that plant predominant diets it can improve reduce the risk of dementia. And I know that many of us with MS are worried about cognitive functioning. So getting in, making sure you're adopting a healthy diet is really, really helpful in preserving that cognitive function long term.
Well, you've shared some important information about the benefits of making these lifestyle changes that are really going to improve someone's quality of life. Let me ask you, what would you say are the top 3 takeaways that you'd like our viewers to
Okay.
remember?
Top 3. Okay. So I think the first one is to take stock of your life with the 6 pillars. What are you doing well? What can you improve on? And then the second takeaway would be set a goal or multiple goals. And you want to write it down, be really specific, make sure it's actionable, have a start date for your goal or an end, a date that by which you want to accomplish it. And then tell someone about your goal. So you've got someone to kind of keep you accountable for meeting it. And then I think the third one is don't be afraid to ask for help. I think a lot of us are fearful of being vulnerable and of telling others that we do need some guidance and support. But it's really important to do that. And I think most people, especially good friends, close family, wanting to help and are going to be receptive to that too. So reach out to family and friends, get your help from your doctor and your medical team. Reach out to physical therapy or behavioral health therapists, other support people if you need it.
Well, I want to thank everyone who submitted some great questions today. And thank you, Dr. Doggett, for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Before we close, I want to remind you that the National MS Society's MS Navigator team is your best partner when it comes to connecting you to the very best information and resources on living with MS. You can reach an MS Navigator by phone, email, or through the Society's website by chat. For information and resources on MS, please be sure to visit the Society's website. You'll find research updates and news, information on connection programs like self-help groups and MS Friends. You'll hear about ways that you can get involved, and you'll find out about upcoming events that are taking place near you. Remember, you can connect with the National MS Society and others affected by MS on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And I hope you'll join me every week on the Real Talk MS podcast, where I continue the conversation that we start here. You'll find Real Talk MS at realtalkms.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. I'd like to thank Dr. Doggett for joining us today. Please remember that a recording of this webcast will be available at the Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSexpert, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. I hope you'll join us at this same time for next week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. You can always find our upcoming program topics on the National MS Society's website. And now I have a favor to ask each of you. Getting your feedback on today's webcast is important. So if you're watching on Facebook Live, you'll see a link to a survey pinned to the comments section. On YouTube, you'll find that link in the program description. And on Twitch, you can find that link in the chat. Completing the survey makes a real difference. The information you provide helps us continuously improve, and it helps shape future programs. The survey takes just 1 minute, so I hope you'll take a minute to fill it out. On behalf of Dr. Lisa Doggett and the National MS Society, I want to thank you once again for joining us. Please stay safe and make healthy choices.